I declare the agenda briefing forum of the 13th of February 2024 held in Council Chambers at level 2, 388 Hay Street, Subiaco, open at 5:32 p.m. Welcome to you all. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this land, and I acknowledge their ongoing connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco. I'll take attendances, and it's nice to see all elected members present in person and all of the executive leadership team on hand in person as well. So I'll move to disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures this evening? Good. There's no approved deputations, so I'll make a quick announcement because tonight's briefing coincides with the launch of Subi Spritz. Subi Spritz is the Southern European-inspired food and wine experience right here in the City of Subiaco. It's been running for a few years now. It's been a very successful event, and we're kicking off the program again this evening, which means that I've got to leave at 6:30 on the dot. Councillor Kosovic is primed and ready to go if we're still asking questions. And I've got a nagging feeling we might be still on C3 at that point, but we'll see how we go. But about Subi Spritz, there's 25 businesses participating. Most of them are local. And there's 30 unique events across the 10-day program, and some of those events include a Conti roll contest, progressive lunches down Rockaby Road, and an outdoor movie screening at the Subi Night Market. So if the last 2 years are anything to go by, this year should be a raging success, and as we do every year, we not only want to show people a good time, but we want to promote Subiaco and keep people coming back and keeping Subiaco front of mind. And it's also going to be a diplomatic mission because I understand the Italian Vice Consul will be there at our invitation, and he's going to say a few words about the Italian spritz culture. And we might also be joined by the Italian Consul from the Italian Consulate here in Perth. All right, so we don't even have an hour left. We've got 56 minutes, so let's get into it. Officer reports. Let's start with C1, the Development WA referral for number 1 Wembley Court, Subiaco. Any questions on C1, councillors? Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, I have a couple. But probably to start with, look, this is not really our RAR, our Responsible Authority report. So we've listed a number of conditions we would like to see on the by Development WA, but have we got any power to enforce these conditions or make sure that they're actually put on the report?
Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So this is through the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority, also known as Development WA, and they've sent this to the city for referral. As being the local government in the area who has the technical expertise, they rely on us for a recommendation for conditions. So we can provide them with the strongest recommendation, but it is up to MRA and Dev WA on which conditions that they impose. Should they impose conditions, those conditions are enforceable, and MRA Dev WA would be signing off those conditions until such time the land is normalised to us. So we can make the best recommendation and work with Development WA officers in assessing their conditions, but it is their determination to make and conditions to impose as they see fit.
Okay, look, I'd just like to follow up on a couple of the conditions that we're recommending. The first one would be condition 11, that a minimum of 14 dwellings must be affordable housing provided in accordance with Development Policy 9. Now, do the plans, as they've been put forward, show 14 dwellings for affordable housing, or in fact, any affordable housing?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, no.
is there any way of the report actually says that perhaps it wouldn't be approved in the building permit stage unless that was done. Is there any way we can actually enforce them having some affordable housing in one of their developments?
Thank you, and through the Mayor. So if that condition was imposed by the decision maker, then we would be able to ensure that those affordable dwellings are provided. Obviously, Development WA will be signing off on that condition in any event. So it is up to Development WA, and the MRA as a statutory authority. We wouldn't have any ability to impose that condition or make sure that it is enforced, as we don't hold the planning control for that area.
What is Dev WA's track record in providing affordable housing in their developments?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. I couldn't speak on behalf of all developments that Development WA do, but for the AFC site in the Subiaco redevelopment scheme, I don't believe that any affordable housing has been required in developments approved by MRA or Dev WA.
Never. Is that your understanding? Is they've never done it within the CB redevelopment area?
I believe they may have done it in other parts in the redevelopment area. I might take that one on notice or refer to the Manager of Planning Services, but I'm not too sure if they've done it in the Australian Fine China site.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So it is pretty common for Development WA to require affordable housing, so it's their policy. So one of the typical arrangements is that the Department of Communities is engaged by the developer at an early stage, and then there's agreements put in place, contractual agreements between the developer and Department of Communities or similar providers. But there are examples of affordable housing being provided in, I guess, Subi Centro more broadly. We'd have to probably get more detail on whether it's been imposed within the AFC precinct, but ultimately it's up to Development WA to impose the requirement, noting that this is a build to rent model, which is slightly different to a normal, I guess, housing model. It's quite new to Western Australia, so it is I guess a type of housing, but we think that affordable housing should be offered within that offering as well.
Thank you. Look, a couple of the other conditions I thought were interesting. One was the protection of verge trees in condition 2. How important is that? And again, how enforceable, for the city, because the verge trees are fairly important.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. That's a pretty standard condition that we impose or recommend to be imposed on all planning approvals where infrastructure may be, I guess, potentially damaged by construction-related equipment or similar. So it is enforceable. In my experience, that condition is, if we recommend it, it's almost always imposed by Development WA.
Okay, thank you. The main objection to this proposal, or the recommendation for refusal, is that it's over height by 1 story. I suppose the point I'm trying to get to is at the southern end, I think, because of the basement car park and the way it sort of comes out to the street, in that southern area, it's really going to appear more like a 7-story building, isn't it?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So that is one of the main reasons why the officers are not recommending that we support the proposal, given the height afforded to this site under the framework that Development WA has in place allows up to 5 stories, and this is up to 6. So I guess the story you're referring to, being the basement, is not. We've calculated to be a story, so that's articulated on page 7. So yeah, it does add bulk to it, and that's part of the reason we're not supporting that element of it.
And look, I'll leave you go with this, but again, at that ground level, it's all going to be apartments, and this is Hay Street, sort of part of our main shopping precinct, and yet they seem to be arguing that they shouldn't be required to provide commercial use because one Subiaco, etc., has been now provides sort of commercial premises. Is that a reasonable argument? Considering this is sort of our main business street?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So, yeah, I guess the planning framework in place does kind of contemplate more active uses on the ground floor, and this proposal only includes residential uses. Sometimes residential uses can activate ground floors, but in the Officer recommendation, we've asked Development WA to consider possibilities to integrate some commercial element to the ground floor as part of the proposal.
I might just jump in and ask a question because it flows on from yours, Councillor Powell. If the City of Subiaco was to ask that the ground floor be considered for commercial use, what would be the reasons for an authority like Development WA to take a different view? Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through there, Mayor. The primary reason for the activation for commercial uses on the ground floor is one that they provide an activation and an interesting street front. Now, when planning policies and documents and controls are put into place, they're pretty much old, and as time goes by, other areas may develop, and sometimes the centre might shift to other areas, so commercial uses might locate in other parts of the city. So Development WA may consider that a tenancy in this space might not be viable, and it might be more beneficial to have an activated street frontage through the design of a residential building or dwelling or foyer or whatever it might be, instead of a shop that might lay vacant because the centre of Subi has shifted given other developments and things that have occurred since the planning framework was put in place. So that's why there's some discretion allowed in planning framework. While they might want to achieve that active use and a commercial or office or coffee shop or whatever it might be might achieve it, it might not always be up to date with other things and how centres and cities change.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to square a couple of things, and I'd be keen on your advice on this. In the staff report, it says tables 2 and 3 shows that the application is not considered to meet SRS2 and AFC design guidelines. But looking at the design review panel, they didn't seem to have any troubles with the design of the development. Can you comment on that? And I guess, sorry, I should put in there as well, the other part of my question is the applicants are panel members to the design review panel, from what I can tell. Is there a reason there? Sorry.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I don't believe this went to the Subiaco City's design review panel, so it would have likely have gone to the Development WA one. They consider it on a range of matters, and built form is one of them, but they don't do a planning assessment, so it's the planners who look at what the guidelines and policies say, and we've made an assessment based on that, whereas the design review panel will look at the 10 design principles in SPP 7.0 or whatever their guiding framework is, and make a comment on those principles. But it's the planners who've come up and said actually it doesn't comply with the guidelines in the redevelopment scheme.
Just to clarify, so the advice note in this is not the City of Subi's design review panel, and it does contain 4 people who are panellists, but also the applicant. It just seems strange that they're making, and the note doesn't seem to reference that anyone stood out of the meeting or any of this kind, that they're applicants making design decisions or advice on this. I think it's about page 79 of the public attachment.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So just to be clear, the City of Subiaco has a design review panel, and Development WA has a separate design review panel. Some members do cross over between the two. It's not uncommon to have panel members that sit on multiple different panels. When we consider this referral from Development WA, we don't look at development as design review panel advice from Development WA, because we're not, I guess, the responsible authority to review or assess the application in full. We're looking at a higher level for the implications on the City of Subiaco, but the officers of Development WA who are assessing the application would take into account the advice received from their own design review panel.
So I understood Councillor White's question wasn't so much concerned about what we did with the advice from the panel, but he was simply asking about the composition of the design review panel that's advised Development WA and whether there's some overlap between them and the applicants in this case. I think he's just seeking clarification on that.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, we will review that question because it's we'll take that one on notice. It is the DRP of Dev WA, so if we need to get more clarity on whether interests were declared and so forth, then that would be up to us and to question from Dev WA, but we weren't there and we weren't party to that apart from what was provided in the application pack.
Okay, so we'll take that one on notice. Any other questions? C1. All right, we'll move on to C2. Appointments to the City of Subiaco's Design Review Panel for the term 2024 to 2026. Any questions? Councillor White.
Yeah, I imagine some of this we'll take offline after. But just the selection criteria I couldn't find anywhere. And also, again, being cautious that we don't want to go into any names and those aspects, but we're not also provided with any qualifications. It does refer to people with experience, but we're not, there's none of these details are there. And again, I know some of this will take offline, but I guess for me, one point here is, what is the criteria that we're using? And I think that's public enough. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the question. So page 13 of the agenda, under the comment section, lists the selection criteria, and it comes from 5.6.2 of the Design WA Design Review Guide. So it's in the report to Council.
Follow-up question? Councillors, any other questions on C2? C3, a major land transaction on multiple lots. Questions on C3? Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, if I may, Mayor, there's been quite a bit of correspondence and councillors asking questions on C3. And for the sake of transparency, I would like to summarise some of the questions that I've put and the responses that I've received, so that goes on the record and people know what's actually being put by the questions that are being asked by the councillors. They'll be fairly brief.
It's a little bit unorthodox, Councillor Powell, to summarise questions and advice received outside of the briefing. Look, if there's questions that you think would be best put on the public record, I suggest ask them now, even if you know the answer. I'd hate when people do that, but I think that would be the way of getting it on the record.
Well, I can. I just thought it would be a lot quicker way to go through and very quickly summarise what the questions were.
Yeah, I suppose the thing is, if you summarise advice that was given outside of a briefing, it may not capture everything that the author intended.
Well, look, I'll ask the questions if you like. All right. The first question was the building a new community centre would cost about $3 million. What would be the approximate cost of refurbishing the current community centre up to usable standard?
Thank you. Unless someone indicates otherwise, I'll assume most of these questions are going to be best handled by Manager Commercial Services and Property, Joel Guest. Or we can bump it up, Director Corporate Services.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. So that would really depend on the extent of the refurbishment undertaken. So, for example, we could do a cheaper, more tactical refurbishment of the building, and that would somewhat extend the life of the building, but it wouldn't necessarily improve its amenity or utilisation. So, a more substantial refurbishment may cost, say, for example, on the order of $2 million, plus or minus 50%. It really depends on the design and what the functional specification is, what we would want to put in there. Noting that, there are pros and cons of refurbishing versus essentially starting again and making something more fit for purpose. Given that the current centre wasn't initially designed as a community centre, it was designed for the provision of health and aged care services. And it's got, for example, 35% of the building is staff offices. So there would be, if we were to consider what to do with the building, the opportunity to make it more fit for purpose.
Okay, thank you. What consideration is being given to whether an upgraded centre would attract greater community use, and would that be a viable option?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So certainly, if we redevelop the centre, it could attract greater community use. In assessing these options, we've considered a number of factors. The city already has 3 other community centres, including 2 within walking distance, and those community centres already have substantial capacity to cater for future growth. So those centres will also require substantial investment over the next 10 to 20 years to ensure that they're best placed to cater to evolve to community needs. And while we are financially well positioned, we need to be prudent and prioritise, as we have a number of ageing buildings that will require renewal over the next 10 to 20 years. So in addition, the listing of the significant tree on the site makes redevelopment of the site a little bit more difficult. And plus, the Subiaco Community Centre, unlike some of our other community centres, is located on freehold land. So it presents the opportunity to release funds to help fund overall city priorities. So the original business plan back in May last year proposed selling all of the lots, and now we've got community submissions in hand, and we also have to take into account the listing of that tree. So now we propose selling 6 Rupert Street only and creating a pocket park on 203 Bagot Road. So generally, it's recommended that community facilities built on Crown land rather than freehold land in order to prudently manage the city's finances. Where we have facilities based on freehold land, and particularly where they're at the end of their useful life, and we have other facilities which serve a similar purpose, it's worth considering whether the value of that freehold land can be released. We can sell freehold land, or we can lease it. We can then reinvest those funds into other council assets, or invest those funds to generate income to supplement rates income. Through you, Mayor. So maintenance costs are typically higher for a building at or near the end of its useful life due to the amount of reactive maintenance that can be required. We typically have, a number of infrastructure elements in an ageing building that may be failing or may be at risk of failing that can require more cost to remediate. So in recent years, so we've looked at a few different years, financial year 2021 is a recent year where we didn't have the impacts of COVID. We also had staff in the facility for a little while following the fire at 241 Rockaby Road. But so FY 2021 didn't have those factors, and we spent $47,000 in maintenance expenses. Just as an indicative breakdown, $15,000 of that was towards cleaning at the facility, $15,000 of that was towards plumbing. There was other reactive maintenance of around $5,500, air conditioning of $2,000, and so on and so forth, gutter cleaning. So you can imagine how some of those components go up if you don't have a facility that's designed with contemporary standards in mind to minimise those costs, and which has failing or ageing components that require reactive attention.
Of the 2 blocks which may be turned into a pocket park, if option 2 is adopted, 203 Bagot Road is 2 lots, and would the entirety of that be planned to be given to the park?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor. So together the 2 blocks provide 608 square metres. So under the current recommendation, the entirety of that would be given to a pocket park. It's open to council to adjust this approach if desired.
What is the estimated cost of the park conversion, including demolition of the current community centre?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor. So the estimated cost of building a pocket park with a high level of amenity would be up to $1.5 million, depending on the extent of landscaping and furniture within the pocket park, and that could be varied downwards depending on what we think is desirable in that location and the degree of amenity that we want for the community.
What would be the function of the pocket park, and who would use it?
Through you, Mayor. So we think that that's really important to do further work on with the elected members should they choose to proceed with a decision for a pocket park, and also to consult the community on that. But there really is a broad range of outcomes possible for the community. So, for example, you could envisage the space as a reflective green space in the heart of Subiaco. It could be adaptable to be activated to a range of purposes. So, for example, for quiet repos at lunchtime, to community wellness and fitness, a play break for families who've just been shopping in the main street, to events which add to the vibrancy of the city centre. The park, there's also an opportunity there to contribute to the tree canopy and local vegetation. So that's a really important consideration, as that then also reduces the heat island effect. It's becoming harder to find opportunities to increase the level of vegetation in the city. We've done a lot of work on that already, and so it's good to consider the opportunity to do more of that when it presents itself.
Thank you. Is it possible to earmark some of the funds from the sale of the abutting properties to fund the establishment of the park, so residents can see a direct correlation between any disposal of the land at 6 and 8 Rupert Street and new facilities?
Through you, Mayor, yes, it is notionally possible. It might be a little bit tricky to do it technically until we have a refined budget for the park, but we could certainly, dedicate a portion of the funds from the sale and put it in the investment income reserve, which is where we typically hold funds for our park assets, and we could say something about, notionally to be used. We'd have to work on that. And the rest could be put in the building and facilities reserve to fund other ageing community assets. So you can see that link.
Okay, getting close to the list of the questions from the weekend. In regard to 6 and 8 Rupert Street, does the heritage status protection is it likely to result more likely to result in the retention and restoration, particularly of 8 Rupert Street? And would the city be responsive under our current heritage policies to requests for technical and financial support from new owners?
Through you, Mayor. So 8 Rupert Street is heritage listed, so that provides heritage protections as you describe. 6 Rupert Street doesn't have specific heritage protections. It's zoned residential R50. It would still be subject, of course, to standard planning considerations. So the new owners would be able to access our standard services through the DA process. Just considering the balance versus other DA applicants, it's unlikely that we'd offer additional financial support. Our existing planning requirements should be sufficient to provide for suitable development outcomes. And given the desirability of these blocks, we don't think that there's additional financial incentive required to attract motivated buyers.
Thank you. And from our site visit this afternoon, a couple of follow-up questions from that as well, please. What is the combined size of 6 and 8 Rupert Street, or what are the size of the 2 blocks?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor, the approximate size of each of those blocks is 400 square metres each.
If number 6 is sold, how will number 8 manage any parking if their parking lot's sold off?
I might defer that to the Manager of Commercial Services and Property.
Through the chair, number 8 Rupert Street currently doesn't have any off-street parking, so it would be open to the owners to either park on the street, or alternatively they could create some off-street parking at the rear, directly off Salisbury Street. There's potentially a little bit of retaining that they'd need to do, but certainly within the realm of possibility that they could create some off-street parking at the rear.
And that possibly leads on to this question. Is it possible then to re-subdivide some of that land to create a different configuration of properties that perhaps may even increase the size of the pocket park, or that may change the configuration of what's being planned?
Through you, Mayor, I'll just make a quick start. We had notionally considered such options, but we hadn't really investigated it in great detail. I'll defer, if possible, to the Director of Development Services.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, yeah, there are a range of subdivision options available. There are minimum and average lot sizes under the R codes, but we don't foresee any issues in achieving those. To figure out what kind of configuration works best. So we don't see that as an impediment at this stage.
Can I just add? I think the other consideration is, in that regard, is you've got 6 and 8 similar size blocks. And the issue that you raised in terms of 8 Rupert Street and no parking, that's not unusual in Subi, so can apply for residential parking permits. So what you might find is that's highly sought after by somebody that actually uses public transport and doesn't require car parking as well. So you can subdivide blocks in different ways, but noting that there's sort of that number 6 Rupert Street is also the traditional size of the rest of that street, or those 2 streets.
No, look, I think I'll let some other people ask some questions because I've also submitted them.
Thanks, Councillor Powell. Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. 3 questions, thanks. There is concern in the community regarding the city selling off some of its property holdings, which includes the potential sale of 6 and 8 Rupert Street. Why has this been considered, please?
The question is, why is it being considered? Director of Development Services.
Director Corporate Services, if that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Through you, Mayor. So we basically covered that in the original business plan and the paper put to the council meeting in May 2023, and we've re-summarised it in the current paper. Just to summarise it for everybody's benefit, the proposal to sell these properties considered a few factors, including that, first of all, the Subiaco Community Centre has been nearing the end of its useful life for some time, and it's become increasingly expensive to maintain. It hasn't had a great deal of utilisation in recent years. The city has other community centres within walking distance, which do have sufficient capacity to cater for future growth. The adjacent property at 8 Rupert Street was also recently vacated, and the city isn't otherwise in the business of leasing residential property, which it was doing at that site. And overall, in that context, the city has a number of ageing community assets which will require prioritised investment decisions over the next 10 to 20 years. So in order to manage the council's finances prudently, it was proposed to sell the properties to enable the city to upgrade and repair other community facilities.
Thank you. Question 2. Could you also explain the decision taken by Council to diversify its investment holdings into a type of sovereign wealth fund and the rationale for doing so? And further, what is the role of the city's future fund going forward?
I know the CEO wants a gig on this question, but Director Corporate Services, you go first, and I'm sure the CEO will add something about the future fund if your answer can be supplemented.
Through you, Mayor, and it's a topic that we do like to discuss a lot, so hopefully we're on the same page. But basically this one was covered last year in the February Council meeting when we put a business plan out to the community to pursue a course of diversifying our investments slowly away from commercial property in Subiaco and with a couple of additional holdings in Perth into something more diversified. So the reason that we would do that is, so for example, if there was a downturn in commercial property in Perth, our returns and asset value could be considerably impacted because we have all of our eggs in one basket. So contemporary financial investment management philosophy would say that it's more prudent to diversify investments across a range of different types of assets so that if one asset class goes down, then other assets that you have in hand may actually be going up because they're counter-cyclical to that asset. And so overall, you maintain a steady investment return. That it's basically a way of managing financial risk and managing the volatility in the returns from your investment portfolio. So we do, the intention is, as highlighted in that business plan, to adjust the city's investment mix over time to reflect a more diversified portfolio, utilising the expertise, preferably of a fund manager or fund managers, and that's much as most Australians do in respect of their superannuation. So it's nothing that hasn't been done before.
Good answer.
Thank you. Just one more.
Sounds like you used to work for a bank or something. Councillor Kosovich.
Question 3 and my final question. What assurances can you give the community that the proceeds realised from the sale of any of the city's commercial or the single residential property at 8 Rupert Street will be securely invested and not simply frittered away?
Through you, Mayor. Yes, it's a very important question, and we have a range of mechanisms to provide for financial prudence, as local governments do under legislation here in WA. So for example, we have the adoption of our annual budget, and that provides the council and the community with good oversight as to how we're spending our funds and the ability to, to make decisions in respect of that. As evidence of how we've been tracking on that front. So over the last several years, we've been able to maintain rate increases of 0%, 1.9% and 1.9%. And that's due to our strong financial management practices being really prioritised in terms of directing funds where they're most needed and wanted by the community, the strength of our asset base and our, good oversight of that, and also population growth.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Firstly, I'm not a supporter of disposing of the community centres, so take that into consideration when I pose the following questions, please. If it is disposed of, right? My first question would be, because of it seems the trees creating the pocket park, okay? And if that's the case, right, could somebody explain to me the benefit of a pocket park in that location where arguably there's almost a pocket park next to it as Rupert Street hits Bagot. But even if that wasn't there, would that be the administration's opinion as a desirable location for a pocket park? Get them in onto a pocket park on a main road. Bagot's pretty busy. Disposal and buying a pocket park someplace else on a little quieter street perhaps might be a better idea. Have we given consideration there?
I'll take an answer from any member of the ELT. I know you'll all have. Okay, well, someone's microphone's already on, so CEO.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, it's a good question, and one of the things in thinking about how to respond to the tree being registered and significant, and also in briefings that we provided council in terms of to increase our street tree canopy now is all the difficult locations, close to almost planting the 16,000. And so location is interesting, you're correct. I mean, there is, to an extent, a component of that in the cul-de-sacing of Rupert Street. So so there is already an element of that. There's a bus stop right there as well. So it would be open for council to consider and work through as to whether it's appropriate or not. One of the benefits it's still pretty active place through there for crossways, as you know. But I think equally other elected members have pointed out that there are other pretty close locations, beautiful Rankin Gardens not so far away as well. So it just comes down to an assessment was how close the community centre is to that tree and making sure that it can live for 75 or more years. So that's why the recommendation of the demolition, but that community centre also goes across 3 lots. So it'd be up to council to determine the extent of the pocket park and whether that works there or not. But it does present opportunities. There is good thoroughfares, and perhaps the Director of Corporate Services wants to add something as well. Or maybe the Director of...
I think there's a good context in our local planning strategy where that intersection is the intersection of 2 green corridors. So one going up Rupert Street and the other one going across Bagot Road. So our future strategy is that we try to increase urban greening as much as we can, and this would be at the intersection of a couple of corridors which seek to connect green areas through Subi.
Thank you. Look, this is a town on the rude side, not to anybody in the room, by the way, so don't panic. But I brought up before the acquisition or the amalgamation of the balance of the 2 lots on the corner of Bagot and Salisbury, and if the property was disposed, right, I'm still inclined that the property is put up for the concept of the pocket park sort of semi-remains. Right, I'll talk my way through this, so that the tree survives, and then but the property, the lots that are facing Bagot are sold, and they're sold along with the lots running between at the rear, which are 6 and 8 Rupert, are sold collectively, but they're actually put up under contract to allow somebody the time to do a deal with us, and then enough time to actually try and acquire the 2 lots on the corner. I believe the city has misinterpreted the nature of the ownership of the 2 lots on the corner, and they actually are acquirable. So they could be acquired under a contract. So we could basically, like this, we put them up for sale, for private treaty. Somebody comes along and says, okay, I'll give you X for all of it, Okay, but I want, and we say we want, besides the money issue, we want one thing: we want the tree to stay. Okay, and two, all right, we will give you that, and then we'll give you the time. Right, so you got the tree's got to remain, and that could be incorporated into the development. And what we'll do is we'll give you enough time to negotiate with the owners of the properties, the two remaining lots that would square it off. Okay, although it would still have a nice big tree on it, but that would just be incorporated into the development, which creates a park in itself anyway, because we just say that area becomes open to the, open to the public. Okay, but you're still acquiring a much larger site. Okay, so it's what I'd do if I owned it. Okay, that's how I'd put it up for sale. You'd still get a open park area, which then attaches to, as the CEO mentioned, the end of the cul-de-sac. So we get a semi pocket park, about all we need, right? And things. I'm still keeping in mind what I first said. I'm not a supporter of actually disposal anyway. But if I was going to sell it, that's how I sell it. Okay, and I'm not questioning.
So, Councillor Burns, what do you want to know from Director of Corporate Services or the CEO? We've heard what you would do if you were selling it.
Well,
what do you want to know of our staff?
Well, Mr. Guest before has told us that he sent people to speak to the people on the corner, and they're an absolute no-go. I can tell you that's not the case. All right, that the owners on the corner, right, are willing to dispose of their land. Okay, now at a price, of course.
So you're probably wanting to know if the city's explored the types of deals that you're describing.
Yes, they've been spoken to, but they were spoken to by somebody that just cold called their deal. I just think there's a better deal to be done here.
Sure.
Okay.
Director of Corporate Services, have we explored the types of deals that Councillor Burns is describing, and have we done so well enough?
Through you, Mayor. So I'll make a start and then maybe defer to the Manager, Commercial Services and Property, who has investigated it further. My understanding is that we had, certainly considered that approach, because from a commercial perspective, it does provide for a larger lot, which may be more attractive and make it easier for a developer to develop a larger site. As you highlighted, it would be highly contingent upon, two of the properties are not owned by us, they're owned by two private, residents, and so they would need to be willing to come into that. As far as I'm aware, we hadn't explored further, contractually what that would involve, but I'll just defer to the manager in case he has anything further to add.
Yeah, certainly, through the chair. And in some ways, this is a bit of a sensitive question as well, because you're dealing with people's homes, and as someone said to me recently, everyone's home is their castle. And I think, Councillor Burns, what you're proposing is almost akin to option 3 in the officer's report, which is to proceed with the business plan as proposed, which is the disposal of all lots, either as one contiguous site or sold separately, but building some conditions into the contract of sale in the manner that you've described. So that is an option that has been explored. In terms of the two lots on the corner, we have spoken to one of the owners, not us directly, but through an agent. Our understanding is that they weren't prepared to consider a sale at that time. This was probably about 12 to 18 months ago that they had that conversation. So it's possible that things might have changed. But also we're also cognizant in terms of how we deal with this, and that we do so in a manner which is respectful and sensitive, and potentially you're correct that there is a price that someone may be prepared to accept, but based on the information we have to date, we didn't feel that it was an option worth progressing in terms of wrapping it up with the lots on the corner.
CEO, then we'll get back to Councillor Burns.
Yeah, I think if I could just add one other thing, I think the issue is more around timing because, as the manager pointed out, in terms of the home as the castle, everyone has that the timing by which they wish to vacate or not, and if it's their family home. So there are other options as to how you might proceed if it's truly important in terms of getting those two blocks, because one thing local government does is it sort of outlasts everyone. We've been around for 127 years already. So there is issues that can that we could look in terms of the timing that may achieve what you're seeking to do, but that would be a different approach, or would be potentially a component within both option 1 and option 3. So there is that possibility as well. So you could do something now. I mean, number 8 is not, part of it, that block you're referring to, or you could proceed as the manager suggested, straight up with option 3. So there is ways to progress it.
Look, and that's why I said it's a sensitive issue. For me, it's sensitive in, I suppose, in both things. Mr. Guest says that it's public, so we might as well just carry on, that they've been approached and they're not interested, okay? I believe that's not the case, all right? My knowledge against his knowledge, but I just think all the difficulties aside, and property's not an easy business, okay? But the best outcome, one, I don't want to dispose, okay? But if it is disposed, the question is how do we word up something to put it right into the if we can change the agenda or whatever else, that it's put, if it is going to be put to the market, there is the option, right, that it's put to the market under a private treaty sale that is unequivocally states the tree stays. All right, that's a no-go. And you keep the tree and give us a price, and we'll give you X amount of time to drop out, right, because you either don't want to proceed because you can't acquire the corners, or you can acquire the corners, you do proceed, okay? And somebody comes along, people will make that offer. I'd make that offer. That's how we get there, I suppose. If there's my question, David. How do we
look,
there?
it sounds like it's a procedural question.
You get the park and you get the money.
Sure.
Okay, and I think that's the best answer.
Yeah. Well, look, I've heard the manager say that what you're describing is potentially captured by option 3. But if you wanted to be more prescriptive about what option 3 would look like if adopted, I think that would require an amendment. I'll go to the CEO for governance advice about whether that's correct. I imagine that the report's not going to be changed at this stage because I haven't really seen reports get changed at the behest of councillors within my memory. CEO, how would we get to what Councillor Burns is describing? Councillor Burns, if you could just press your button, please.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Essentially, it would be, as the standard practice is to move an alternate. We could assist because there is a bit of finessing in terms of obviously Section 358 of the Local Government Act, but also in terms of essentially that is proceeding with the business plan. And in the business plan, I don't believe we articulated how they would be sold. So potentially there is opportunities to approve the business plan and work through the contractual mechanisms to achieve that. So it would be an alternate that we could assist with.
So just for abundant clarity, the officer recommendation is recommending option 2, even though you wouldn't see the words option 2 mentioned anywhere in the recommendation, and what you are describing, Councillor Burns, would be option 3 with a bit more detail prescribed. So it'd have to be submitted as an alternative in the usual way.
So just in saying that, through you to the CEO probably, I'm again, reticent, but I'd rather have a better option if something's going to happen. Who would you suggest that I speak to with regard to tidying up the words? Pardon?
It sounds like it'd be Director Corporate Services and Manager Commercial Services and
Well,
Property.
I'll just work out a time to meet with them, and then we'll just get some things tidied up. We can have a nice little luncheon or something. Thanks.
Excellent. Any other questions on C3? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McMullen. In view of the recent decisions about protection of significant trees on private land, if all the lots were sold, including 203 Bagot, would the tree actually continue to be protected?
Director Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the greatest protection would be if it is in local government council-owned land or managed reserve. If it is to go to private land, then any alterations or changes to the tree or removal will need a development application. That development application will be considered by council and obviously has all the appeal rights attached to it. You would think, though, in the design of any new development, the tree would form part of any public open space, or not public open space, sorry, I should say open space, and it is on the frontage, so there probably is an incentive to retain it from a commercial point of view. But to answer your question, it is protected through the tree register, but the greatest protection would be if it remains in council ownership.
Yeah, if you want.
I think what the proposal of this option is to clearly articulate the manner in which the contract of sale would occur. And so that may well include excising that component as public open space through the subdivision process. And ultimately council, so through section 358, would have to approve that, would have to be advertised to the community, public comments back, etc. So there would be another round of council and community input into that. And I would envisage, given it's a private treaty type situation rather than a tender or a auction that's been proposed in that within option 3, then that you would seek to have some sort of design to confirm what actually is going to occur with that. So it's sort of a longer process, but ultimately it's providing the market with an opportunity to respond to the whole as an option rather than what staff have recommended.
I'll just ask a question to supplement Councillor O'Connor's question, because I think we've skirted around the circumstances which have given rise to your question, and that is that 2 nearby local governments have sought to amend their town planning schemes to protect trees on private property. The Minister for Planning, probably on the advice of the WAPC, has rejected those scheme amendments. The state government is talking about its own urban forest strategy. How does that bigger picture interact with the protections that we've tried to impose under our own town planning scheme? Could it be the case that we sell off this land to a third party, and subsequent to that, the state government does something to overrule the protections in our town planning scheme? Director, Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. We have taken the approach of protecting trees as recommended by the state government. So currently the tree preservation register has been included as supported by both the minister at the time and the WAPC. So I don't believe that that's a significant risk that may occur that will remove those provisions, because the climate is changing, and it's imperative that we do all that we can to incentivise the retention of trees, and significant trees should be things that are considered by local government. So I don't think there's a big risk, given that we've been consistent with previous advice.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to bid you all arrivederci. Councillor Kosovic. There's a gavel here and a bell. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Over to you.
Right, any more questions on C5? Councillor De Vries.
Yes, through you, Deputy. Just a question regarding the possibility of the item being separated into two different decisions so that we don't have to make the decisions on both 203 Bagot Road and 6 and 8 Rupert. Could those decisions be separated so that we could delay either decision or so that it could go to workshop? Because it does seem that we still have a lot of questions that we are exploring. And as Councillor Powell made clear, he had a lot of questions, and I know that other councillors have sent in many as well. I won't read mine, but the gist of it really is that this seems to be a really big decision, and having more literature that we've recently been shared with us, is it possible that we could either delay the entire decision, or could we look at separating the two decisions in so that we can feel comfortable, because there seems to be an appetite for that. Thank you.
If I could, through the chair, Deputy Mayor. It's always open for council to defer an item, subject to refer to the strategic workshops. That's one option. The other option is there might be elements within the recommendation that you wish to deal with individually rather than as a whole, and that's a simple case of requesting the presiding member to deal with them one by one. And that's another option. So you may be able to deal with some of the parts, and then likewise depends on how either alternatives or amendments may have been put forward as well as to. But it's open to the presiding member to sort of coordinate the traffic, so to speak. But all of those options are available for council, and it will be a decision of council. But it's up to the presiding member to separate out each individual item if you wish.
Any further questions for C3? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, and through you, Deputy Mayor. Just wanted a clarification question. The actual cost to demolish the community centre, I got that the cost to build a pocket park would be up to $1 million. Is that including what's the demolition cost?
Director Corporate Service.
Thank you. I'll defer to the Manager, Commercial Services and Property, if I may.
Thank you. Through the chair, that high-level estimate of 1.5 million plus minus was inclusive of demolition, and we've based that on similar projects that we've done, such as the demolition of the old operations centre at 2 Upham Street, and other public realm projects that we've completed. So very high-level estimate at this stage. It's very early days. The 1.5 million. Oh, the demo cost. So by comparison, Upham Street was about 400,000. So this is significantly less complex than that. So I would estimate in the order of 250,000 to be conservative. But at the end of the day, it's difficult to make that estimate until you either get a QS done or you go to market and seek quotes.
Thank you. One more question. I know that this recommendation to sell these lots is on the business plan. Is part of that business plan to reinvest the money in the future fund? It's just that when that question was asked by Councillor Kosovic earlier, I got the impression it could be to fund other ageing facilities?
CEO?
Look, I'll just ask the first bit and then manager or director may jump in terms of the specifics of the business plan because I don't have that open right now. Ultimately, council will determine at sale, but also in each subsequent budget as to which reserve they want to bid in, what the reserves are actually used for, etc., etc. So those are always decisions of council. It's prescribed in the Local Government Act, Section 2.7, that you're in control of the finances. So, you know, at the time you can determine which reserve that it's used for, and then as each subsequent development or improvement occurs, it's up to the council of the day to determine whether they wish to use the funds from that reserve for that purpose. And that's why I think Director of Corporate Services indicated you can articulate right at that point in time how those funds should be used, but ultimately it'll be a decision of a future council either in adopting a budget or throughout the year adopting a budget adjustment.
Thank you. So through you, Deputy Mayor, I now have the business plan in front of me, and it includes, along with the proposal to dispose of the property, to deposit the net proceeds of the sale of the property into the Buildings Reserve. So the Buildings and Facilities Reserve is where we hold funds to fund, renewal of our renewal and new building projects.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just a very small question. The properties at 6 and 8 Rupert Street are identified for disposal via public auction. Why public auction?
Director of Corporate Services.
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor. There's a little bit about that in the agenda report, and basically public auction, there's 3 options available to local governments when disposing of property as outlined by the Local Government Act. So you can do a private treaty. That's a bit tricky when it comes to residential buyers, as if you want to do a sale by private treaty, the Act requires you to advertise the details of the proposed purchaser and the purchase price, and that's something that might be a little bit unfamiliar to residential buyers, and so it might potentially deter them. The other option is by public tender, and similarly there's some aspects of that process that wouldn't necessarily be familiar to a residential buyer. So sale by auction is the most straightforward method. It's transparent to the market, and it's the easiest for a residential buyer to understand. And also, given the current state of the property market, we don't foresee any issues with attracting motivated buyers.
Any further questions for C3? Okay, that being the case, we'll move on to C4, the 2023 Annual Electors Meeting report. Are there any questions? Councillor De Vries.
Yes, I note that there were only 2 community members, and I remember not so long ago there were thousands of people, hundreds of people lining the streets. How are we going to get the people back? No, this was not a serious question.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I'll move on to C5. C5 is the financial statements and reports for the month ending 31 January 2024. Are there any questions? Sorry? December, oh, sorry, December. My apologies. Councillor Powell?
Yes, and through you, Chair. Look, I only noticed this afternoon when I was going through the financials, but it seems like we've been spending a lot of money on lawyers. From my sort of figuring, it's around about $70,000 in December, and I think that's almost more than we're paying Synergy. So Is that largely to do with one case, I would ask? One case that the city is dealing with?
I think rather than say one case, it's multiple cases within a couple of properties, perhaps. I could say it that way.
Let me add, I think we know where the majority of that cost has gone. Any further questions? Okay, we're moving on to C6, which is the financial reports for the month ending of January 31. Are there any questions? Right, that completes the agenda for the first part of the meeting. Before we, the remainder of the business is confidential, so I'll advise the press that it's time to depart, if you would please. And I will now seek a mover and a seconder to close the meeting. Okay, just close. Yep. Close the meeting at 6:42.